Homeland Security employees get locked out of their computer networks. A British man released from Gitmo blows himself up in Iraq. And Flat Earth.
And the Lord said unto Satan, Whence comest thou? Then Satan answered the Lord and said, From going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it. Job 1:7.
The world consists of vast cultures with stories that constantly connect their gods with the inner earth. And not just their gods, but reptilian races of hybrid entities. We're talking superhumans, strange animal creatures, or what the Book of Giants refers to as monsters.
When you're dealing with the areas around the world where so much myth, legend, oral tradition, and belief, contemporary belief, there's always almost an embracing of the underworld.
The earth is actually dynamic. By that, what I mean is that, we all go to work every day, we get in our car, we are driving over a shell under which, according to the Bible, there is supernaturalism, there are entities, there are creatures, there are beings.
If you were going to hide something and keep something secret, there's two places to do it. One is in the deep, deep oceans. The second place is a labyrinth, a network of tunnels and areas which go deep underneath the earth.
There was truth to this idea that this race called the Vril-Ya had been existing under the earth since the days of the Great Flood in the antediluvian world. In fact, the belief of the Vril-Ya and of the power of Vril was actually so prominent among German occultists that it gave birth to a secret society, one of the most notorious secret society involving the Nazi regime, called the Vril Society.
The Nazi expedition to Shambhala originally started in Greenland with the Edda. The Edda were ancient Nordic writings describing a hollow earth. They went there to see if they could find further details or information. This was the top of their agenda. They had to find this opening. And the next thing you know, they had the Neuschwabenland expedition to the Queen Maud Land area of the Antarctic. It's what drove them. It was a religious belief that drove them to cordon this area off and claim it for their own.
When I read Admiral Byrd's description of things that he saw and how it felt going into this abyss type of opening, but it also was a long time ago, and we've learned a lot about quantum physics since then. We've learned a lot about how these types of things would work, and there are too many descriptions in there of things that he saw that line up with current quantum physics understanding.
The underworld of our people, very similar to the Cherokee stories, the Creek stories, the Maya Incan stories of underwater panther and these underworlds where there was completely different civilizations that lived under there.
We know in the Bible as the earth is below heaven. That's where the watchers, according to Peter, have been confined.
Well, at a certain point, it seems to go beyond the realm of just irony to the point of just sheer hypocrisy. I just don't know what else to even call it at this point. I saw this yesterday. Somebody pointed this out to me, and yes, the Hollow Earth Chronicles, brought to you by Justin Fall, the whole Skywatch TV crew, apparently. And I watched this, and I'm basically just at a loss for words. I just keep thinking about the Skywatch newscast, which was about a month ago now, where they finally addressed Flat Earth after, 2 years. And for this to come out now and to realize that when they were doing their little response to Flat Earth, they were all busily, collaborating and working on this Hollow Earth Chronicles documentary, and it's just astounding. So I don't know what else to do at this point, but let's go back and listen to Derek Gilbert talking about the flat Earth and all the arguments that he makes, and let's just listen to that in light of what we see coming out in this Hollow Earth presentation, and just you tell me if it makes any sense at this point.
We really tried not to address this story at Skywatch TV. Frankly, in our opinion, it's divisive and it's a distraction. 24 hours a day. And what you see behind me on the screen here is a representation of how the people of the ancient world viewed the earth and its relationship to the heavens, the sky, and Sheol and the abyss or Tartarus below that. And this is represented in descriptions in the Bible, and that's where members of the flat earth community draw their support for their beliefs. Let me just say this. The Bible often uses figurative language in a variety of ways. Poetic language, metaphor, allegory, simile, anthropomorphism, in order to illustrate a point. God revealed himself to people of the ancient world. And remember that the Bible began to be written down around the 15th century BC. If we accept that Moses is the earliest author of the books of the Bible, starting in the mid-15th century BC. And God revealed himself in terms that men and women of that age could understand. God did not impose on them the burden of understanding 21st century astrophysics as a precondition for hearing the law and then the gospel. He revealed himself to them in ways they could understand. Otherwise, revealing himself in that day and age would have made no sense whatsoever.
Okay, I'm going to have to interject at this point, because, wow, every time I hear this argument coming from Christians, it astounds me, because as even the slightest bit of research will tell you that despite the fact that the Hebrews believed in an enclosed system and a flat earth system, as he actually admits in this presentation, it was the ancient Greeks who seemed to have no problem conceiving of the fact that they were a globe. And yet the fact that it was the pagan Greeks, specifically guys like Pythagoras, who is one of the forefathers of modern occultism, who is revered by Freemasonry and other secret societies. So why is it that the pagan occultists in ancient times were perfectly capable of believing in a globe, but it was the simple-minded goat herder Hebrews who God had to dumb it down for them? Do you see what a backwards argument that is?
In other words, if they needed a 21st century understanding of astrophysics and geology to accept the gospel, God would not have revealed himself at all until our day. I would also suggest that the photographs of Colonel Jeffrey Williams, retired NASA astronaut, who is an outspoken Christian, a creationist, a financial supporter of the Institute for Creation Research, who has published a book of photographs that he has taken during his hundreds of days in space. In fact, he spent a cumulative total of nearly 2 years in space. And all of the images that he's taken of the Earth from the International Space Station show a globe. But proponents of the flat Earth model, because this is a direct challenge to their understanding of the Bible even coming from a man who is an outspoken, Bible-believing Christian, believes that the earth was created by God as described in the Bible, and puts his money where his mouth is by supporting the Institute for Creation Research, must be lying.
Well, I vaguely remember there being some other famous individual who published a book and declared his belief in evangelical Christianity. What was his name?
Because he worked for NASA. NASA is evil, and therefore he must, with no more evidence than that. This is an example of circular reasoning.
Circular reasoning. Is it really circular reasoning? Once again, I'm sort of at a loss for words, trying to understand how, on the one hand, you can be talking about the Vril Society and explaining how it was part of the occult core of the Nazi war machine, and fully comprehend things like the reality of Operation Paperclip and all the Nazis that were brought in as, in the founding of NASA. But suddenly those dark occult roots are of absolutely no significance once they came onto American soil. I mean, are you really going to try and argue that point? You're going to talk about the occultism of the Nazis and then deny the occult roots of NASA.
They start with the conclusion that NASA is evil, so he must be lying. Therefore, all of his evidence is disqualified. With no more evidence that he is being deceitful than that. They start with the conclusion that it must be untrue, rather than letting the evidence speak for itself.
And once again, this is pure false assumption entirely. And I know for myself and for many, many other people who I engaged with, the exact opposite was the case, in that it was not until I began to actually let the evidence speak for itself, which of course required me to actually look at the evidence, i.e. the footage and the material that NASA puts out and the arguments that they make. I actually had to start looking at it, combing through it, without assuming that it all had to be true. Once you start to look with an open mind, then the evidence just becomes blatantly obvious. And unfortunately, as difficult as it might be for us to accept that somebody like Jeff Williams espousing evangelical Christian beliefs, and I did a whole video on him, this was not a preconceived belief of mine at all. It was only because the evidence was so overwhelming that the ISS is indeed fake, and these guys are hanging around on wires in a set and on the Vomit Comet and in pools and everything else. It's been demonstrated 100 different ways. The evidence is overwhelming, and if you're too proud to see it, then you just refuse to see it, refuse to look. But I know they haven't looked. So again, it's just ignorance talking.
God revealed himself to man in a manner that we were able to understand 3,500 years ago. We know in the Bible that the watchers, the angels who kept not their first estate, according to Peter, are kept in chains in Tartarus until the judgment, kept in darkness until the judgment. Tartarus. The Bible often uses figurative language in a variety of ways.
We are driving over a shell under which, according to the Bible, there is supernaturalism, there are entities, there are creatures, there are beings.
Metaphor, allegory.
But reptilian races of hybrid entities. We're talking superhumans, strange animal creatures.
Simile, anthropomorphism, in order to illustrate a point.
So thank you everyone at Skywatch TV for explaining why when the Bible talks about a flat and closed world, it's being metaphorical and allegory, but when it's talking about literal caverns under the earth, it's literal. So let's clear that up.